Okay, we have connection with our colleagues from around Asia. They have a loud microphone level. So I will stop speaking now, hand over to somebody much quieter than me. Yuri.
Thank you very much, Barnaby. Can you hear me okay? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And today we'll start with the pensionable remuneration. This issue is could be confusing to some, but it's a very important thing to have the picture, get this things straight. So if we could move to the next, just excuse me for a second. Okay, first things first. The system, the United Nations system, has two internal tax regimes, and that is very important to understand. One of them results in gross salaries for the UN staff, and the other one is pensionable remuneration. So unlike the outside world, we actually start all our calculations. The basis of our own pensionable remuneration system is net. But these internal tax regimes result in both involved in adding a tax factor to the UN common system net salaries, and but these two regimes are used for different purposes. The result of applying one of them is gross salaries. The result of applying the second one is the UN pensionable remuneration. Confusing, yes, but there is a history behind it. Actually, the UN pensionable remuneration scheme, or common scale of staff assessment, is actually the younger brother or sister of the first one, and we'll speak to that a little bit later on. But for gross purposes, the tax assessment regime serves only one purpose, and one purpose only. That is to serve, to generate the funds to reimburse taxes that the nationals and staff members, nationals of some countries, are obliged to pay. Whatever the level of gross salaries are, they don't affect your net remuneration. So that's important to know, and we'll speak to that a little later on. But those of you who are in the professional and higher category might have noticed that as of 1st January this year, your gross salaries actually went down quite significantly, and you will see that difference as compared to 1st January 2011. So they went down by almost $6,000, but that's for a midpoint of our salary scale, P4, step 6. But it doesn't mean that the take-home pay, the net remuneration, went down. That means that there was too much money in the tax equalization fund that's used to finance those tax reimbursement. Indeed, the fund was running with a surplus for quite some time, and the Commission received a request from the United Nations to do something about it because there was too much money left in there. As a result, the Commission looked at the rates of those staff assessment for grossing up purposes and reduced those rates. So this is the result of what happened. But at the end of the day, your net remuneration didn't change. Actually, it went up a little bit, but it is for an entirely different reason. So the thing to remember here is that staff assessment for grossing up purposes is only used for generating money to reimburse national taxes. The second tax regime, which is used for pensionable remuneration purposes, however, is a totally different system. First of all, it directly relates to the calculation of the pension benefits as well as the pension contributions. The calculation, the regime itself is based on the staff assessment rates at the 8 headquarters duty stations of the UN system. So we have eight locations where headquarters of the UN family organizations are based. Most of them are in Europe. There is also, of course, New York and Montreal in North America. So those taxes, the average of those taxes, form the foundation of the common scale of staff assessment. This scale is reviewed regularly by the Commission in close coordination with the pension fund, and to make sure that the tax rates that are used really reflect the present day realities. As a matter of fact, there is one review going on right now as we speak. It's scheduled to last for the next 2 years. It's a really major exercise, but I will speak to that at the end of the presentation, and I'll be happy to respond to questions if there are any about this. So, what's in the bottom, and what's the basis of our pension system? It is the income replacement approach. That means that pension should relate to your income while you're in service. That is something that's the pension system is based on, and that is something that the pensionable remuneration should reflect. There are a number of considerations involved to arrive at such a scheme that would be fair, and that would reflect the present day realities. First of all, the income of staff while in service is not really taxed by national governments. Yes, there's just a handful of countries which didn't accede to the Convention on Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations and or specialized agencies, or those which acceded to that convention with a specific reservation that the nationals of their country will have to pay national taxes. However, as we just saw, there is an arrangement in place in the system to reimburse those taxes that are paid by some staff members. And of course, the reason to do that, the reason why these taxes are reimbursed is that we're going to end up with the discrimination by nationality. Because some staff members might be ending up with a lower take-home pay if those national taxes are not reimbursed. So those taxes are reimbursed. That's what's happened while we are in service. However, when the staff members resign, leave the organizations, the Convention on Privileges and Immunities does not longer cover them. So that is something that, the result of this is that most countries do not exempt UN pensions from income taxes. And in most of the cases, they actually do. So hence there is a need to reflect those taxes in the pensions, because if we were talking about the net, the income replacement approach, we were establishing that relationship, net remuneration to net pension. Here we end up with net remuneration versus gross pension. So there is a tax element in there that needs to be added, somehow taken into account, that after you retire, you will need to pay some taxes. So the bottom line is that pensionable remuneration has to be calculated in such a way that it would include this tax element, that after you pay this tax element, you'll end up with your net pension, which would be a certain proportion of your income while you were in service. So that's how the income replacement concept works. And that tax element, that was a long discussion about how it should be done. The common scale of staff assessment is actually the average of several tax regimes that are in place in various countries. And it was decided that if we take only taxes from headquarters locations will cover about half of the population, and maybe more of retirees, those who would be retiring in those places. So it is representative enough. If we just look at the tax systems of the 8 headquarters locations, we would cover sufficient number of employees, retirees, plus there are other tax regimes outside of those 8 headquarters locations, which approximate. They kind of follow one system or another. So the idea is that the 8 headquarters regimes, if they are taken into account, they would reflect fairly the tax burden that the UN retirees will face when they leave the organization. So the common scale process is the purpose of this process is to determine this gross to net relationship at various income levels using the 8 headquarters locations taxes at dependency and at the single rates. Why such difference? The thing is that for professionals, it is the dependency rate that's the basis of the system. It is done based on the comparison with the United States Federal Civil Service and applying the taxes applicable in Washington D.C. area to those salaries. So since we apply dependency rates to those salaries, we kind of establish what would the net take-home pay of somebody with a dependent. And then on that basis, there is also a procedure that actually establishes a separate single scale for professionals. But the basis for the calculation of net take-home pay for professionals is dependency rate. On the other hand, when the salary surveys are done for general service and national officers, the basis for the calculation is single rates, and it is because not every country would have a difference between what would have a spouse allowance or any tax breaks provided through tax legislation for a spouse. So for general service and national officers, it's the single rates that are the basis of the calculation. But the common scale of staff assessment actually encompasses both categories, and that's why both rates, dependency and single rates, have to be taken into account. This slide actually shows the actual tax calculation for New York. You don't really see all those different things, but what's in there is like we start from gross salary and then we look at various levels of taxation. We start from a federal level, various deductions are applied. We then move to state level, then we move to a city level. So all these taxes are applied, and in the common scale process, what is done is we apply these tax rates at different income levels to establish what the net take-home pay after taxes pay would be at the level of 20,000. Then we move on to 40,000, 60,000, etc. So in this particular case, as you see, the tax burden would be 545. But what's done there is we take every headquarters duty station, we take all the taxes applicable to those, and we apply those taxes at different income levels from 20,000 onwards. So we end up with a table similar to what you see on the screen. We apply the exchange rate and we average those rates. So in other words, this table tells you that at the income level of 20,000, the average tax burden at the income level of $20,000, for example, would be $1,479, etc. And then on that basis, what we have done, or what the Commission has done, and what the General Assembly then approved, is the common scale of staff assessment. It's simpler than the table you've just seen, but it is fair enough. It does reflect the tax rate in a fair way, and it's assumed that those rates would cover your future taxes after you leave the organization. While there are common considerations for all categories of staff, there are some specifics involved for the two major categories. For internationally recruited staff, for professionals in higher categories, there is a global salary scale, salary system that applies to all professionals, irrespective of duty station. There's only one base salary that's applied. The difference in post-adjustment is a product of ensuring the purchasing power parity between locations. But the basis of the calculation of professional pay is a global salary scale. And the decision was taken that since the professionals have a global salary scale, a global scale of pensionable remuneration would apply to all staff. And another thing is, when the common scale of staff assessment was developed back in the 1990s, in 1997 it was introduced, the Commission looked at the average length of service in the organization, and it was established that the average length of professionals in the organization was 19 years. But then again, if you take that average length of service in the calculation, you would be penalizing those who have stayed longer. So as a result, it was decided that for the calculation, a slightly higher level of seniority would be used. Roughly a point between the maximum level and the midpoint. So the Commission ended up with 25 years average service. On top of that, the average seniority with the comparator, which is the US Federal Civil Service for professionals, was also about 27 years. So those two things were comparable. So in fact, what the Commission decided is that the net remuneration in New York, net remuneration, that means your base salary plus that post-adjustment element in New York, would be used for determining pensionable remuneration, and to determine the quantum of tax that would be added to arrive at the pensionable salary. 25 years of service would be used. After the comparison with the system, in effect, what that decision meant was that a UN retiree for that category, after 25 years, would receive a pension that would be equal to 46.25% of net remuneration in New York. My colleagues from the fund will probably cover that issue, how the pensions are accumulated over the years. But that is the income replacement ratio that was used for professional category. Okay, so once it was established, then the two questions actually arose. First, what should be the gross pension to result in a pension equal to 46.25% of net? And the second question was, what should be the amount of pensionable remuneration, which would result in the above-mentioned gross pension? Here is the procedure for calculating the pensionable remuneration for professional staff. Let's say it's an example, and we'll go step by step over here. Let's say we were talking about a net remuneration of $60,000 in New York. First, we need to apply this income replacement ratio to establish to establish what the net pension should be for somebody making this amount of net remuneration. So that's, we apply this income replacement ratio of 46.25%. We end up with 27,750. This is the net pension that's supposed to be received after retirement. Step 3 is that magic thing which happens. That's when the taxes are applied reversely to 27,750. I'll illustrate how we arrive at that number in a moment. Basically, this is the result of the reverse application of the common scale of staff assessment. So, in other words, if we had a gross pension of $32,134, and if we applied the common scale of staff assessment, which is currently in effect, we would end up with a net pension of $27,750. And then, of course, since we're not talking about the entire net remuneration that's going to be subject to taxes, because we know that the net remuneration is exempt, generally exempt from taxes, we only gross up that portion that will become your pension. So we only apply the common scale of staff assessment to that portion of net remuneration, and then we apply the same income replacement approach reversely to arrive at the level of pensionable remuneration. So in this case, the pensionable remuneration would be $69,479. So the pensionable remuneration does include that tax element, but it's not applied to the entire scheme. Let me just go step by step at how we establish, how we calculate that pensionable remuneration. Our web page, the ICSC web page, has all that information. So if you're interested, you're always welcome to visit. And there's also a frequently asked questions, and there's a contact me section. So you're welcome to leave your comments and questions in there. But if you go online and you go to icsc.un.org, you will see this opening page that's on the screen now. In the quick links, if you move to salary scale, you will need to pick up, of course, the scale. You will pick up the latest salary scale. That's the one in effect as of January 2012. Then you will see that that's what you will see. You will get the latest salary scale. Let's again take the average amount, the midpoint of the salary scale, which is P4 step 6 dependency rate. So if we have that, that's the base salary for P4 step 6 system-wide, excluding post-adjustment. So to find out what the post-adjustment is for New York, again, if you zoom in on our interactive map on our opening page of ICSC, you will go to, of course, the United States, and then zoom onto New York. So you can find pretty much information on any country that you're interested in. That would include the post-adjustment information, daily subsistence allowance, as well as hardship classification for these locations. In this case, we're interested in post-adjustment, and we're interested in post-adjustment for New York. So as you see, it is 65.5. So to calculate the net remuneration in New York, you would need to apply the multiplier of 65.5 to the base floor salary. And what in essence it means, it's that the net remuneration in New York is 165.5% of your base salary. So we have the net remuneration now for New York. Then we're applying the 46.25. That was in step 2 to establish what the net pension would be at this income level. Income replacement ratio. and we end up with this amount. So far, so good, right? Easy. Now, we're moving to this common scale of staff assessment. How we go about this. The common scale of staff assessment is also can also be found on our web page. If you go to through the quick links to pensionable remuneration level, under the scale itself, you will see the common scale of staff assessment applicable to both. It is not a mistake that it says effective 1st January 1997. Indeed, those rates have not been changed since 1997. So if we put all these numbers on the table, so that's what is going to happen. So for the first bracket of $20,000, say if you have a salary of $20,000, 11% tax would be applied to it. So basically the maximum assessment per this bracket would be $2,200. This is what you're going to end up with if you break it down by income level. So if you have a salary of a gross salary of $20,000, after the application of common scale of staff assessment, you're going to end up with $17,800. Of course, when we're interested in the reverse application of the scale. So this is the formula. We don't really multiply by that percentage, but we divide by the remainder. This is what's going to happen. This is the reverse rates of application of staff assessment. And of course, we change the brackets from gross to net. As I mentioned, at the level of the first income bracket, you would be left with $17,800 if you have a salary of $20,000, and on and on. Okay, in this particular example, let's break this net pension, which we have, by the reverse income brackets. So, of course, the first three brackets would be filled completely, and there's a remaining amount of $12,302, which goes to the fourth bracket. If we apply the common scale of staff assessment reversely, we will end up, of course, with the three brackets fully filled, and the 12,302 would become 17,574. If we add these four columns together, we'll end up with a gross pension of 77,574. So this means that if you have a gross pension of 77,574, and you apply the common scale of staff assessment to it, you will end up with a net pension of 61,502, which is 46.25% of your net remuneration. This is how the link between gross and net is established. And of course, to complete the calculation, you divide the result by 46.25, and you end up with the nominal pensionable remuneration shown on the screen. So, in other words, your pensionable remuneration, which is a notional scale, you don't really receive that money. It, as you remember, the net remuneration is different, but there is a notional number that would give you, as a result, the net pension, which would be equivalent to 46.25% of your net remuneration. Now, if we compare our own calculation that we have just done with the actual amounts shown, we will see that there is a significant difference between the two. The reason for that is, of course, the common scale, as most of the tax systems, is progressive. So you kind of end up paying more taxes the higher your level is. However, there is a provision that says that your net remuneration is adjusted on the same date and by the same percentage as your net remuneration. That's between the comprehensive reviews of the common scale. And as I mentioned, the scale itself has not been revised since 1997, so it's been a while. That's why when you just apply the one-to-one adjustment to your net remuneration and not recalculate it based on the common scale of staff assessment, you end up with your pensionable remuneration kind of lagging behind the common scale. Clearly, this is an issue which the Commission is going to be looking at during this coming review. There is actually some work being done right now, and there was a working group established for the review. This is one of the issues that clearly would need to be looked at during the review and addressed one way or another. Now for the general service category. Unlike the professionals and above, there is a separate net salary scale for every location. So we run those separate scales for various locations based on salary surveys that are conducted. So consequently, we have separate scales of gross pensionable salaries in all of these individual locations. And on top of that, during the surveys, we established that some of the elements of pay which outside employers may provide to the staff are not pensionable. So if they're not pensionable, they should not be part of the calculation of pensionable remuneration. There is one more consideration that's taken into account to calculate GS, NOs, and other locally recruited categories pensions, is the average length of service. Again, when the Commission looked at it back in the 90s, the average length of service was about 23 years. But proceeding based on the same considerations as the professionals, it was decided to establish that average seniority higher than the 23 years. Actually, we ended up with 35 years of service, and again, that length of service is also comparable with the comparative civil service, although it's not really that relevant in this case because for general service and national officers, the U.S. is not a comparator, but for the pension system, it is. So, what the Commission decided based on this is that the net salaries, to calculate the pensionable remuneration, we would use the net salaries in the location. We would exclude those elements of remuneration that are considered non-pensionable, and we'll determine the gross pensionable salary amounts in local currency. And we'll use 35 years of pensionable service to calculate that. The pensionable remuneration for general service is the equivalent of that gross pensionable salary, excluding the language allowance and the non-residence allowance. That's the dying good that's no longer actually in effect. Here's the procedure to calculate the pensionable remuneration for general service and other locally recruited staff. Let's assume we have a salary of 600,000 local currency units. We first convert that amount to US dollars using the 36-month average exchange rates. Let's assume this average exchange rate is 10 local currency units to $1. So we end up, let's say we end up with the same amount that was shown for the professional level of 60,000. Unlike the professionals, the income replacement ratio is higher for these two categories. It's 66.25%, because the length of service that was taken into account in this case is longer than that of the professionals. We're talking about 35 years of service here. So the net pension would be 66.25% of that level of 60,000. So we end up with a pension of 39,750. Again, we kind of going through, we apply the common scale of staff assessment reversely. We end up with your gross pension amount, and then to establish the pensionable salary, we again convert the result back to the local currency. Again, if we look at the specific example to calculate it, this is taken from one of the salary scales at one of the locations. So let's look at grade G1, for instance. G1 at various step levels. These are actual numbers. Usually, what the salary scale shows is several numbers. The first is the total net salary. The total net salary is the salary that was established as a result of the salary survey. Again, the salary survey also establishes the non-pensionable component. What proportion of salaries is not subject to pensionability? There is a provision to that effect because the first 10% of the non-pensionable allowances do go into that calculation, are included as pensionable amounts. But whatever is above the 10% is treated as a non-pensionable component. In this case, we're talking about 2.4%. So we have a non-pensionable component for this location of 2.4%. Then we have the net pensionable salary. That's basically A minus B. So that's the pensionable salary that would be used for the calculation. We have a gross salary, and we have a gross pensionable salary. The gross salary is used for the tax equalization fund purposes. So that's to finance those tax payments. We are not really, in this case, we're not interested in those. We just want to see how those amounts were arrived at. Net pensionable salary, how did it become gross pensionable salary? Again, if we apply the procedure, the first one would be, of course, we'll use the 36-month average exchange rate, which in this case is 92 local currency units. We end up with the salaries as shown on the screen. And the next step, of course, would be to apply the income replacement ratio in effect for this category, which is 66.25%. We apply it to that amount, and we end up with the amounts shown on the screen. And the next step would be to establish what the gross pension should be of the net pension shown. Of course, if we look at the common scale of staff assessment, the entire pension would fall under the first income bracket, which is assessed at the rate of $19. If you look at the common scale of staff assessment. So if you apply it reversely, here's the formula. So you basically have to increase it by about 23%, those amounts. And if you do that, you will end up with these numbers. Of course, you divide the result by 66.25% to establish the pensionable remuneration at this grade. And then to establish the gross pensionable salary, you convert the result using the same exchange rate. You see that these calculations coincide almost to the dollar. There is some difference of 10 local currency units for the higher grade, which could be explained by rounding somewhere. But basically, you'll see that our calculation is exactly right, spot on to what's published in the salary scale. The reason for that, it's not really coincidental that it was the actual example picked. And if you pick most of the most of the salary scales, you will end up with the results very close to the pensionable remuneration, if not spot on. The reason for that is that whenever comprehensive salary surveys are conducted, only the new net salary scale is established. But then, based on that net salary scale, everything else is recalculated using the common scale of staff assessment. That means that there is no one-to-one interim adjustment. There is between comprehensive surveys, but it's not going on for a long time like for professionals since 1997. It only happens from one comprehensive survey to the other. So it's 3, 4, 5 years. So in that respect, the pensionable remuneration of these categories really follows what the common scale of staff assessment provides for. Now, as I mentioned, that's the pensionable remuneration has not been revised for quite some time, or had not been, I'd rather say, because it's now this review is on. The reason for that is actually it's supposed to be reviewed every 5 years. And it was supposed to be reviewed in 2004, if I'm not mistaken. But there was a major pay and benefits review going on, and it was felt that some of the decisions on that pay and benefits review could have had a major impact on pensions. That's why it was decided to hold on to that review, postpone it till a later date. And now it's actually become possible to do that. These are the questions that actually the ICSC and the fund started off with. There's some division of responsibility there on some issues. The fund and the secretariat of the commission works closely together. And as I said, there's a working group that's established to look at all those issues. Of course, there is an issue of common scale, whether it still reflects the tax rates in the 8 headquarters locations, and whether they should reflect only the 8 headquarters locations. This question is also on the table. There's lots of actually issues involved there. With the calculation of that rate, there's a lot of statistics that needs to be gathered. There's a lot of analysis that needs to be done. It's being done right now. There was just one first meeting of the working group in January. There's going to be another one in May. So we'll see what happens with that review. But clearly, it would probably take a while for this review to be completed, because there are a lot of questions. The positions of various participants are not really close on some issues. So all this would need to be addressed. I would also add that the non-pensionable component issue is also being looked at. It is the questions there are, why is it that the first 10% of allowances that are actually non-pensionable by any standard really do go into the calculation of the pension? And the reason for that, of course, is that before in earlier times, with the pre-computer era, let's put it this way, it was difficult to calculate all these things. There should have been some limit of flexibility in terms of treating all the allowances, but now it's much easier to deal with all these things. So the question is whether we still need this margin of 10%. Again, like I said, there are different thoughts of schools in there. We'll see what happens. But this is an issue that's also on the table. Another thing is that, of course, the U.S. pension scheme has changed significantly. They actually moved a different plan some time ago, but now there's enough data to make those comparisons, and actually that comes from the from the commissioners, and the General Assembly is also interested to know whether, you know, the costs of the two pension schemes are comparable. And it's been a very, very thorny and very difficult question because, like I said, the plans are now different, and it's very difficult to compare them. But there are ways of doing it, and actually the working group is now actually working on that. We'll see again what happens. But this is a work in progress. It's just to alert you of the issues that are going to be considered. So I'll stop here. I know it's a little complicated, especially to go over that from the screen. But I just wanted to give you some flavor of how this calculated. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've not been overwhelmed by questions. It might be because you've been overwhelmed by the presentation. We hope you are a bit clearer on pensionable remuneration. Vinci, you have a couple of questions. Okay, we have a wow. Okay, we have a couple of questions. We'll start with a generic one. For the staff assessment, if you could clarify again, where does the money go? And why should, say, staff member pay their staff assessment?
Yeah, it's a very good question indeed, and I probably should have focused a little more on that. The money of the staff member does not go anywhere. The point is that the staff members don't pay for that. It's the staff assessment, if we're talking about for grossing up purposes, that's a product, that's a budgeting procedure to make sure that there is enough money in the tax equalization fund that's used to compensate taxes. Now, the comparison is, the comparison, say, with the U.S. Federal Service is done on a net basis. So we want to know what the net salaries are of our comparator and establish those net our salaries on a net basis. At a level comparable with the U.S. Federal Service, which is our comparator for professionals. So the procedure is as follows. There's a tax equalization fund. That's a budgetary procedure that doesn't really have to do anything with compensation. But there is a tax equalization fund where every member state has its own sub-account. The budget itself, again, there are some differences between the organizations, but I'm talking about like the United Nations and several big ones. So the budget is actually prepared on a gross basis. That means that the salaries of staff are expressed in gross amounts. And there's also a calculation which shows the salaries in net amounts. So what happens is, when the budget is developed, the difference relating to staff assessment, relating to the difference between gross and net salaries, is put in the tax equalization fund. But it's not put in bulk. It's distributed into those sub-accounts of member states in proportion to their contributions to the budget. Now, what happens next is when the budget is done, the sub-accounts of those member states that don't levy taxes on their nationals are returned to those member states. They're actually credited towards their budget contributions. For those member states that do levy their taxes on their nationals, that money doesn't go back. That money is spent to reimburse the taxes of those nationals. So in effect, there is equity both amongst staff members and amongst member states, because those member states that don't require their nationals to pay taxes, they don't pay anything extra. They actually deal with the net budget at the end of the day. Those who do really, in fact, provide the money to pay those taxes. So but that is a totally different mechanism. It used to be one. It used to be this problem used to be addressed through one staff assessment scale. That's why they're called the same: staff assessment for grossing up and staff assessment common scale for PR purposes. But what the General Assembly found out, it became impossible at a certain point to kill those two birds with one stone, because they were faced with the need, say, to increase the resources of the tax equalization fund, because the taxes were pretty high and the reimbursements were running pretty high. And at the same time, the level of overall taxes that are required to be put, the average taxes for the 8 headquarters, didn't grow that much. So that was a dilemma. And it was decided that at a certain point in the mid-80s, those scales kind of drifted apart. And they kind of started developing on their own, based on their own purpose. So that's why you have a simplified scale for reimbursement of taxes, for staff assessment purposes, and you have a more detailed scale of, common scale of staff assessment, which should reflect more closely the pensionable amount.
Okay, I have got a couple of other questions, but they were actually, I believe, for the pension fund presentation. I'd rather save them for that. We also just got one here. Let me just find out. So we won't forget those other questions, and if it's the same question, of course, then we only need one answer. Just one moment. Okay, this is a good one, so we can name and shame. Which countries are trying to tax their nationals?
Well, it's first of all, of course, we're talking about the United States. That's the provision that's invariably applied to everyone. You could check the list of those countries if you go to the treaty series, and you see who ratified the Convention on Privileges and Immunities and who didn't. Basically, what we have is about 20 countries that didn't ratify the convention, but that doesn't mean that they actually levy their taxes, levy taxes on their nationals. If they didn't ratify it, they could have some other arrangements for doing that. But there's a number of countries that actually ratified it with a specific reservation to Article 18b, which is the tax-exempt status of emoluments. We're talking about the United States, which applied that. We're talking about Mexico. We're talking about Canada. There is also Laos, Turkey, Portugal. I think that's it, if I'm off. But the last three are only saying that they would apply taxes to their nationals working at home country. If they're sent abroad, that doesn't work. The generalized exemption is only for the three countries: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. However, we have a major headquarters in Canada, and we were wondering what's happening there. And in fact, ICAO, a civil aviation organization that's headquartered in Montreal, they do have a special agreement with both federal and the provincial government of Quebec about treating the emoluments that are received from the organizations as a tax exemption. So whatever you receive above those payments, you really have to pay taxes. So in effect, that provision is still in effect. It might be applicable to other international organizations, but in terms of the common system, that issue was resolved. Primarily, we're talking about the United States, and that's why we actually end up with the tax equalization fund running in the surplus, because when we talk about the overall staff assessment, it takes into account all the tax regimes, and the original is based on the same thing. But if the tax laws in the United States change one way or another, then we're going to end up with a difference in the tax equalization.
Okay, so I don't want to prolong this session too long, because we do want to make sure we have the pension fund. We've got... Yeah. Could you write your question down, please? Yeah. No? No? We just have a slightly off the subject but worth answering question. See if you're flexible and thinking. Why do the numbers of the steps in salary scales differ between country offices? This is related to the salary scale, but we'll just take that as a ad hoc, and then we'll take this as one more question after that.
Well, that doesn't really relate to pensionable remuneration. What it does relate to is to the salary structure and what we actually have on the outside. Actually, the number of steps is different not only for different locations; it's different for the professionals as well. The idea is, well, actually, the rationale behind it, for the professionals, was that to make sure that people could get some increments to their salaries if they stay in the same grade too very long. So for the most populous grade, for P4s, P3s, and P5s, we have a larger number of steps. But it relates to the internal philosophy of the salary structure. On the outside, yes, we do have a different number of steps. 10, 11, 12 depends on the location. But the Commission did say that we should try to harmonize that, and actually an 11 or 12 step structure is considered to be the standard. But if, for instance, the local practice shows that there is significant differences, I don't really rule out the possibility of adjusting the local salary scale to that. To give you an example, in Rome, for instance, all the step increments are biennial, because that's the practice on the outside.
Okay, the last question, then we'll have a short tea break to allow 150 people to walk to the coffee and tea urns that are outside and walk back again and chat to Yuri on your way. Could you tell us, clarify again, what's the difference between the net pensionable salary and the base salary for UN local or national staff? The base salary, so maybe there's a confusion on what the base salary is not for national.
Yes, there is no such thing as base salary for local staff. What we have for local staff is net salary. That's what's established during the survey. Then we might or we might not have a non-pensionable component. Then we will have the net pensionable salary, which is A minus B. Then we'll have two gross salaries. One would be called, if you look up any salary scale, you will see gross salary. That's the salary that's used for tax equalization fund purposes. And there is gross pensionable salary. That's the one that determines the pensions and the contributions to the pension fund. For the base salary relates to the professionals and above. because the salary structure, the remuneration structure of professionals is you have a base floor salary plus you have a post-adjustment element on top of that.
Okay, thank you very much, Yuri. Please take your tea and coffee and then come straight back for the pension fund.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
When you need to retire or stay. Okay, if we could return to the room, please. If we could return to the room. If we could return to the room, please. Bring your coffee with you. Take your last bit of cake. Ladies, please return. Gentlemen, please return. Not many gentlemen, but please return. Please return, ladies. Ladies. Ladies and gentlemen, please return. Very good. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Sam, I need you to make this working. Okay, welcome back. We move on to the more exciting stage. Do you need to stay for either 19 or 23 years? Or can you afford to leave a bit earlier? We welcome back our colleagues in the region. Apologies for the fact that in Vietnam we like to take a lengthy tea and coffee. So we'll make a start. We'll hand over to our colleagues from the UN Joint Staff Pension Fund. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Good afternoon again, everybody. Okay, we have a lot to cover this afternoon. So some of the slides, if you attended this morning's session, you will actually have seen most of the slides that you will see here again today. But I think as participants of the pension fund, you have a right to know what the pension fund is all about, what the type of benefits are available out there for you. So some of the slides I probably will just go over it very quickly, just for a quick information. If you really need more information on any of the slides, you can do it at the question and answer portion at the end of this, or you could send us an email and we'll respond to you that way. So without further ado, let's just move on. Okay, so for this afternoon, we will give you an overview of what the pension fund is about. We will talk about the plan itself. What are the factors that are being used or that we use to calculate your pension benefits? The different benefits that are provided by the fund. The pension adjustment system. I'll probably just touch on it very briefly because it's really more for those who will be taking a pension benefit, a periodic benefit at the end of the day. And then, of course, we will show you the UNJSPF website and the frequently asked questions. An overview of the fund. So just some statistics for you. The pension fund was established in 1949. We now have 23 member organizations. With the last organization, IOM, which joined us in 2009. The number of active participants, and this, of course, number includes all of you. I assume you're all here. You have a pension number. You are a part of the statistics. There are 121,000 active participants we have in our database. These are figures that are lifted from the 2010 financial statements. The pension fund is still in the process of closing the books, so we don't have the figures yet for 2011. But we anticipate that number, of course, to rise. The number of periodic benefit in awards, meaning the number of pension payments that we make out every month, is to some close to 64,000 retirees. The market value of the assets of the fund, we put that up there because I think there's huge concern over the financial health of the pension fund. So I thought that I should put that up there just to explain things to you a bit. So the market value of the assets of the fund, again, this is the value of the assets as of 31st December 2010. It stood at $40.3 billion. I think the preliminary value that was pegged for 31st December 2011, again, is not the final figure yet because we still have to validate it. It's $39.3 I think it's $39.734 million. So there's a slight decrease. Well, it's not slight, but it's 500 million decrease in the value of the assets of the fund. But I think you all know it's because of the fluctuating markets. The next three bullet points would be the income that this 40.3 billion had earned for us. I think I would like to draw your attention, though, to the contributions received and the benefit payments. The contributions received from our 23 member organizations at the end of December 2010 was 2.03 billion, whereas the total benefit payouts that we made was 1.97 billion per annum. So from these two figures, you can see that the contributions that we got from our member organizations is actually sufficient to pay our existing retirees. So that means that we don't even have to touch the capital of the fund. We have more than enough cash or funds to pay our current retirees. The actuarial situation, which is the last bullet point, shows us deficit, a very slight deficit of 0.38% of pensionable remuneration, and this was at the end of 2009. What does this mean? Normally, in order for the fund to be in balance, we should increase the contribution rate by that much. But fear not, we're not there. There is no plan to increase the contribution rate for the time being. So having said that, you more or less have an idea now of the magnitude of the pension fund. Again, we are among the largest defined benefit plan in the U.S., so we're 31st. And of course, that deficit that you see there was the first deficit since December of 1995. So again, this is just a graphic picture of how our contributions compared with the benefit payments. Again, it's just for you to get an idea that, again, as I said, we have more than enough to cover for the pension payments that we make every month. Okay. So the valuation of the fund of course takes a long-term view using actuarial valuations. This actuarial study is done every 2 years. The last one is okay. The figure that you saw there was from 2009. The next one was actually done, and it's in the process of being completed as of December 31st, 2011. We don't have the results of that study just yet, but I think it is anticipated that it will again show a deficit. We're hoping that it's also going to be a slight deficit. What is actuarial valuation? Basically, we look at the current and the projected asset values, compare it with the current and the future liabilities to arrive at, of course, a projected surplus or deficit. I think I explained all those bullet points, but basically from what you've seen from the previous slide, you know that in short to medium term, the fund is practically unaffected by the current market conditions. So if you fear that the fund is in a precarious situation just in case, the markets fall, I think that we can safely say that it's in good health. Your benefits are assured, so I think there is no reason to fear for the time being. I mean, the management of the fund is very closely monitoring the situation, and I think that we are confident that we can act fairly quickly in case we really need to take action. For now, we're in good standing. If you want information on where we're heavily invested, on the types of assets the fund has, they're all in the fund's website, which I will go over. I will give you the fund's website later for those of you who do not know how to access this information. The slight deficit of that 0.38%, basically there were two factors that contributed to that slight deficit. One is the market conditions, which we know in the last 2-3 years have been very volatile. But also, significantly, we have noted an increase in the mortality, in the lifespan of our clients. Right? Before, for our 60-year-old male, the life expectancy was pegged at 84.4 years, and it's been up to 87.4. For females, you're now expected to live up to 90 years of age. So for the fund, it's good news and not so good news, because that means larger liability for us, because we will be paying you for a longer period. But of course, for you, it seems that you are looking at a very happy, long, healthy retirement. So again, this is just a graph that will show you how we have grown over the years. So I think regardless of what you hear, that the UN is downsizing over the years, this somehow tells you a different picture. You see that the number of active participants that we have in the database, and I think it's only the pension fund who would have this information, shows an increasing trend in the number of active participants. Same thing with retirees. You see also an increasing trend in the last 10 years. And I guess as the active participants join the rank of retirees, we will continue to see this increasing trend. Again, that's just another graph to show you how the workload of the fund has increased over the 10 years. So, what is the pension fund all about? 2 points. I think the first bullet point is obvious to everybody. We're here to provide you with a pension when you reach normal retirement age, when you separate from service. But I guess what's not obvious to everybody is that we're also here, the pension fund is also here to provide you with a coverage in case you become disabled while in active service, meaning you cannot work anymore, or in the event that you die in service, die in service or die after retirement, then your survivors could be covered. I mean, they are entitled to receive a survivor's benefit from the pension fund. So I guess the second bullet point is not really obvious to everybody. So the pension fund is a defined benefit plan, meaning that no matter what happens in the market, we guarantee you your pension under a defined benefits plan. Your pension is calculated based on established formulas and factors. So it doesn't matter where we're invested. If we do well in our investments, you are assured your pension. Your benefits are not directly linked to your contributions. What we're saying here is that, let's say you join service, you're a G3, a G2, but you retire after many, many years as let's say that's a bit of an exaggeration, a USG, but let's say you retire as a P4, P5. We look at your last 5 years of service. We pick the best 3 years of the last 5, and your pension is actually based on those last, the best 3 years of your last 5. So again, contributions. What we're saying here is it doesn't really matter what your pension contribution is. We go by your pensionable remuneration. We apply the rate of accumulation to that. But hopefully the next few slides will explain to you how it all plays together. So of course, when we're ready to calculate your pension, what are the factors that we actually look at, right? We look at your age at the time of your separation. How old are you when you separate from service? For those of you who joined after 1 January 1990, your normal retirement age, meaning the age at which you are entitled to a full pension without any reduction, would be 62. If you joined prior to 1 January 1990, it's 60. Right? Not to be confused with your mandatory age of separation, which is the age of separation that you're supposed to separate from service, from active service from your employing organization. We also look at the length of your contributory service. Age, as a general rule, the longer you are contributing to the fund, of course, the larger your benefit will be at the end of the day, because we look at the number of years that you are contributing to the pension fund. There's a rate at which your benefit accumulates for each year of contributory service. There are two sets of rates, but I think for many of you in this room, it will be the rates that are applicable for those whose participation, in fact, commenced after 1 January 1983. So there will be the next slides that will show you what your rate of accumulation are. I already touched on the last point. We talked about your final average remuneration, which is the average of the highest 3 years of pensionable remuneration during your last 5 years of contributory service. So I guess I can skip this unless there is anybody in this room whose participation commenced before 1983. So we go to this next set of accumulation rates. Okay, so for you, your first 5 years would fetch you 1.5% of your FAR. The next 5 is 1.75. The next 25 years is 2%, and the next, after 30 years is down to 1%, subject to a maximum accumulation of 70%. And that 70% would fetch you 40 years of contributory service. Now, your current participants in the fund, we just put that up there because you have to be aware of these options, because there are very strict time frames that are attached to these options. One is validation. Right? Validation means that, let's say you started under a short-term contract. You're not in the fund just yet. Eventually, you were given a fixed-term contract. You start or you commence your participation. You are allowed to pay for contributions for the period that you were not eligible to join the fund. That's validation. The thing is, you can only validate within the first year of joining the fund. Right? So let's say you had a short-term contract. Let's say 1 September 2011. Come 1 January 2012, you were given a fixed-term contract for 1 year. You joined the fund in January of 2012. Right? So for the first 3 months, you were not eligible to join the fund. You may pay for the contributions for those first 3 months, but you have to do it within the first year of entry. But let's say if you had this prior non-contributory service of like years and years ago, you can no longer avail of this option. So it's very important that you realize that these are bound by strict time frames. Now, restoration. I think we had a question this morning. Let's say you worked before. After 5 years or 6 years of contributory service, you separate. And then 5 years down the road, you rejoin the UN and the pension fund. And you were paid for that prior period of contributory service. You may actually pay back the payment that was paid out to you before and restore that prior contributory service. Again, you can only do that within 1 year of re-entering the fund. Transfer of pension rights. The pension fund has transfer agreements with several international organizations, for example, the World Bank or the IADB or the EU. If you work for any of those international organizations and you join the fund, or join UNDP, UNICEF, or vice versa. You leave UNDP, you join the World Bank. We have transfer agreements with these international organizations. Basically, you can move your pension rights, accumulated pension rights to or from. Again, it's bound by strict time frames, so we're just putting that up there so that you know that is an option that's available to you. Under the fund's regulations, there is no provision for voluntary contribution, meaning in order for me to increase my contributory service, I'm just going to pay into the fund without a corresponding contract. That is not allowed in the fund's regulations. The only way for us to accept contributions, voluntary contributions, is in the event of a special leave without pay, where you have the option, if you go on special leave without pay, to actually contribute to the fund. However, it's a very expensive option because not only will you have to pay your 7.9%, you will also have to pay the organization share. So 23.7% of your pensionable remuneration, you will have to pay from your own pocket. Maybe this would be an option if you are actually looking to avail of pension benefit at the end of the day. But if you are quite young, probably this will not be an option that's you know, to your advantage. Okay, so the different benefits provided by the fund, I'm just going to go over some of them very quickly so that at least you know if any of these benefits would fit you. A withdrawal settlement, what is it? Let's say you join the fund after, I don't know, 4 years you separate from service. If you don't have 5 years of contributory service, you only have one option. That's a withdrawal settlement. Basically, we just pay you back your own contributions plus interest, and that's it. You sever your ties with the fund. This is also an option that's open even if you have more than 5 years, but you haven't reached normal retirement age. Meaning, let's say you separate from service, you're 58, you had 20 years of service, you don't want a pension from us, you can opt to take a one-time payment and just run away with the money, do what you like, and you know, we'll pay you it. I mean, again, depending on your age, it may not be a good option for you, but it's out there, right? The only group who may not avail of this would be those who are separating from service at age 60 or 62 with more than 5 years of contributory service. If you opt for that, the pension fund will tell you no. We are not paying you withdrawal settlement. We will force you to elect a periodic, a pension, because it's more to your advantage that you get a pension. Remember, pension is payable for life, and your survivors are also covered. So we look after your own interests. We tell you you cannot avail of this option. Again, in order to be entitled to a full retirement, you must be at least age 60 or 62, and you must have at least 5 years of contributory service. Now, a question arose earlier, what is 5 years of contributory service? What if I started as an ALD for 4 years and then continue on as an FTA for the next 9 years? All those, for us, the pension fund does not make any distinction between ALD or FTA. For as long as you have the status of a UN staff member and you are contributing to the fund, all those years will be counted as contributory service. Quick snapshot of how we calculate your pension benefit. And I think this will tie in, skip this one here. After 1 January 1983, this will tie into Mr. Orlov's 46.25% that he presented earlier, and that's how we arrived at 46.25%. So here is a person who had 25 years of contributory service. Final average remuneration is $90,000. If we apply the accumulation rate, you will see that the total accumulation rate is 46.25. You apply that to the 90,000, full pension is 41,625. Now, under the full retirement benefit, of course, you have the option of taking a lump sum, which is up to a maximum of 1/3 of the benefit. You can go lower than the 1/3 if you don't really need that much cash to increase your periodic benefit, but you cannot go over that 1/3. We move on to the next benefit, early retirement benefit. What is it? If, let's say, you leave at age 55 or later, but below 60 or 62, and you have at least 5 years of service, contributory service, you may opt for an early retirement benefit. What is the difference between an early retirement benefit and a full retirement benefit? We apply a reduction factor to the early retirement benefit. Why is that? Because your payment will commence sooner. So we don't have to wait until you're 60 or 62. We'll start paying you when you separate from service. And we anticipate to be paying you over a longer period, which is why we apply a reduction factor to your benefit. Right? So please pay attention. If you're thinking of taking an early retirement and you don't have 25 years of contributory service, right? We will reduce your benefit by 6% for every year that you fall below 60 or 62. So let's say in the example I gave this morning, if your normal retirement age is 62, you, let's say, separate at 55, or you said, I don't want to work anymore, I want to go, I want to take early retirement. You don't have 25 years. So that means you're 7 years away from normal retirement age. So how does that translate? It's 7 years multiplied by 6%. Your retirement benefit will be reduced by 42%. So that is substantial. If you have 20 years, if you're lucky, you have 25 to 30 years, your reduction factor is lower. And if you have 30 years, the lucky few, it's only 1% for each year that you fall below. So again, just pay attention to the reduction factors if you are thinking of taking early retirement, considering the amount of reduction that will be applied to your benefit. Now, under the early retirement option, you also have the option of electing a lump sum. I hope that you're still with me. Okay. I don't know if anyone in this room would be interested, but this is just giving just an idea of, because we get questions, a lot of questions as to when I'll take a lump sum or when I will. But I think we've covered this one this morning, so I'll skip this one. If you want more information, we can go back to it later on, but I think I'll skip this one for now. Now, deferred retirement benefit is another type of benefit that we're offering. This means that you separate from service. You're not 55 yet, right? But you have more than 5 years of contributory service, meaning you're vested the pension right. But you're not 55. Let's say you're only 40 years of age. You separate now. You decided, I think I'll leave my money with the fund so that when I reach at least 55, I have the option of getting a pension. Or I can wait, if I don't need the money, I can wait until I'm 62 and start drawing a pension at that time. This will be the option for you. You leave the money with us, and then when you're 55, if you choose so, you can write to the fund and say, now I want a pension, I'm 55. The only thing you have to remember under this benefit option is that there is no lump sum and there is no child's benefit payable under this option, but your surviving spouse will be covered. disability benefit. As I said earlier, we cover you in case you become disabled while in active service. Now, the thing with disability benefit is that if you become incapacitated while in active service, your HR office, that's your first point of contact, right? They will look at your leave record to see if this case would merit submission to the medical service for eventual recommendation for a disability benefit to the staff pension committee. It's out there. You have to be deemed disabled by the staff pension committee in order for you to start receiving a disability benefit from us. So again, your human resources office would be the initiator of this benefit. Once it is awarded, it's payable monthly. If you're age 55 and you are deemed disabled, your disability is deemed permanent, meaning you're no longer up for review. So basically, you can get this pension, a disability benefit for life, right? If you're at least 55. But if you're less than 55, then your disability benefit is usually subject for review, meaning depending on your condition, the pension committee will decide whether you'll need to send them your medical report, let's say every 2 years, every 5 years. Again, it all depends on your medical condition. It will be reviewed, and they will have to see whether you merit to continue receiving this disability benefit. But basically, a disability benefit is paid for as long as you remain incapacitated within the meaning of the fund's regulations. Okay, child's benefit, of course. Let's say you opt for a full retirement benefit or an early retirement benefit or a disability benefit. Your child under age 21 will also get a child's benefit from the fund. Right? The only exception to that, if the child is over age 21, that child may receive a child's benefit if the child is deemed disabled, meaning that while in active service, you are or were receiving a special child's allowance for that disabled child. It's not automatic. It has to be applied. I mean, you have to apply for it through your human resources office. They'll have to submit the case to the medical service, you know, the usual work. And then we will consider paying the child who is over age 21 child's disabled benefit. As I mentioned earlier, if it's a deferred retirement benefit, that's the only type of benefit you're not entitled to a child's benefit. Now, if you're thinking of taking an early retirement and you're getting a pension already, you have to be mindful that a child's benefit is not payable on your separation date. We will have to wait, or you will have to wait until you're 60 or 62. See if the child is still over age 21 at that time. And if so, that child will get a child's benefit. So what does it mean? Let's say you separate at age 55. You have an 18-year-old child, right? Your normal retirement age is 62, so that's 7 years. By the time you reach age 62, unfortunately, the child is already over age 21. So there will not be any child's benefit for that child unless the child is disabled. However, if let's say you only have a 10-year-old, after 7 years, you're 62, obviously the child is still less than age 21. When you reach 62, we will start paying that child the benefit. Okay? So I'll just skip this one. Basically, it just tells you the amounts of the child's benefit. Again, for children's benefits, there's a minimum and maximum amount. What you just have to remember is that the child has to be born while you're in active service, meaning before you separate from service. We wouldn't take the child if that child was born years after you separate. Or if you adopt a child years after you separate, then that child will not be considered for child's benefit by the pension fund. So the child should have been in existence at the time of your separation from service. The only exception to that is that if the child is born within 9 months of separating, we call that child in utero, meaning your spouse is pregnant. When you separate from service, child was born within the 9 months of separation, then of course we will take the child. Now, it's very important that you know that, and the only way for you to verify if we have the child in our records is through your annual statement. We'll touch on that in a little while. But basically, the child should be in existence at the time of separation. So if you want to adopt, if you want to have children, do them now. Not after you separate from service. And by child, we mean stepchild, adopted child. These are all children under the fund's regulations. And in the fund, we don't have a limit on the number of children, unlike in the UN, where I think you only are allowed 6, sometimes even 1, depending on the nature of the contract. But for the fund, we take in as many children as you have, although we would always prefer to see it in the personal action forms. It's easier for us to verify that indeed this has been a child that you have been receiving child's allowance while in active service.
All right, so we're moving on to surviving spouses benefit. As you are aware, you are covered for death and disability, so here comes the coverage for the risk of death, unfortunately. But so in case a participant dies during active service or a retiree dies after having separated, you're entitled to a benefit that is called a surviving spouses benefit, and basically it means that if you were married at the time of death as an active participant, and in case of death, then in that case, your surviving spouse would be entitled to a benefit. For a retiree, a surviving spouse would be entitled, provided that you were married at the time of separation to the spouse and remained married until the time of death. So under these two conditions, we would pay what we call a surviving spouses benefit. How much is a surviving spouses benefit? Basically, for a retiree, we would look at the benefit to which the person is entitled at the time of death and then pay roughly half of that entitlement, or 75% before, for someone who has converted the benefit, who has elected a lump sum payment. So what I'm saying is, if there is a case of death, we are looking at what would have been the retirement entitlement for this former participant, and then divide the full benefit entitlement before conversion into a lump sum and pay half of that. All right? There's also an entitlement to what we call a divorced surviving spouses benefit under certain conditions. So there might be at the same time an entitlement to a surviving spouses benefit and an ex or divorced surviving spouses benefit. Here we're talking about the divorced surviving spouses benefit and which are the conditions under which the pension fund would pay such benefit. So we have a recent change in our provisions in 2009, and the following are the conditions we are looking at in case of death and in case there is an ex-spouse, to see whether this ex-spouse might be entitled. So the first thing we're looking at is, were you married to the ex-spouse for at least 10 years during which you paid contributions to the fund? So this is an essential condition. If that is indeed fulfilled, we would move on and check the other conditions that are following. So then the next one is, did your death occur within 15 years from the date of divorce? If that is the case, if it occurred within 15 years from the date of divorce, we would then consider that there might be an entitlement. If death occurs more than 15 years from the date of divorce, there would likely be no entitlement unless there is a legal obligation for maintenance. And then we look at the age of the ex-spouse and would pay, if there was an entitlement, only as of age 40 or older for the ex-spouse. And finally, and probably the most important condition actually, is we would look and check the divorce decree in file, or request one, to see whether there is an express renouncement in the divorce decree or the settlement agreement to any entitlement from the UNJSPF to a pension. If we have a divorce decree in file and there's such express renouncement in the decree, all the other conditions are overridden and there would be no entitlement. So basically what we're saying is, for someone who is in the process of a divorce, this condition is certainly very important. So in case there is a clear and express renouncement, we would honor that decree, obviously. Otherwise, as I said, we check these prior 3 conditions and then go by that. Now, in case then there is a benefit payable to an ex-spouse and there is also a surviving spouse, we would actually pay in proportion to the duration of the years of marriage to the ex-spouse and the current spouse, so the surviving spouse. Can skip that one. Another possibility is, and I said before that an entitlement to a surviving spouse's benefit arises only provided that you were married to that spouse at the time of separation. However, we have a provision that would allow you to purchase what we call an annuity to actually cover a spouse that you marry after separation, provided that you avail yourself of this possibility to purchase an annuity. If that is the case, so if you marry after separation, you would have to inform the pension fund within 1 year from the date of marriage and would have to pay from your pension entitlement to the pension fund in order to cover this future or potential future entitlement to a surviving spouse's benefit under this article. Please keep in mind that if you do elect to purchase such annuity, and very few people do so, in that case you cannot renounce this or you cannot revoke this election unless your spouse died before you or there's a divorce, in which case we would then, of course, accept the revoking of this annuity and we would not reimburse you any money, but we would honor that going forward. Another benefit that is potentially payable is a dependent or secondary dependent benefit, which is payable only if there's no other benefit payable under the regulations to a spouse or an ex-spouse or a child. So if there is none of the other benefits payable and you do have a secondary dependent who was financially dependent on you prior to your death, in that case we may pay what we call a secondary dependent benefit. Normally, a secondary dependent should be reported to your organization before your date of separation and would also be reported to us in a personal action form. There are some exceptional cases where it's reported post-separation, but usually that is the case. Secondary dependent, you may know, is either mother or father or sister or brother under age 21. I'm going to skip these details. I think it's a lot of information that probably don't need right now. And finally, there's this residual benefit that we may pay. A residual benefit is corresponds to your own contributions to the fund, basically. So what it is, it's in case you died, and at the time of death, there's no survivor entitled to a benefit from the fund. So no surviving spouse, ex-spouse, child, secondary dependent. In that case, the contributions that you paid into the fund during your contributory service belong to you. So these contributions should be paid out to you in some form. Ideally, obviously, your contributions participate in your pension payment. But in case of death, and if at the time of death there's still money sitting in the fund that corresponds to your own contributions that have not been paid out yet as a retirement benefit or some other survivor's benefit, in that case, that money would belong to your estate or actually to a designated beneficiary whom you should designate on a form that we hopefully have in file, and if not, you should probably submit that form, which is called the Designation of Beneficiary Form A2. So on that form, you can designate one or several people whom you would like to be the designated beneficiaries in case of death, in case there is no surviving spouse or child or other entitled. Mainly, this applies to anyone who is single at the time of separation, because obviously someone who is single, unless there's a secondary dependent, would probably, or a child obviously under age 21, is more likely not to have a survivor entitled to survivor's benefit at the time of death. So anyone who's single, but actually anyone in the room should check that there is this designation of beneficiary form in our file to make sure that in case of death and in case there's no other survivor's benefit payable from the fund, that we would have a clear designation whom you would like any monies to go to in case of death and in case there's still money sitting in the fund that belongs to your own contributions. As I said, to whom would such residual payment be made? Actually then to the designated beneficiaries on that form. That could be anyone you wish this money to go to, children over age 21, other family members, or some institution or foundation, whoever. Of course, if you are married at the time of separation, most likely your spouse, if you continue to be married to your spouse, obviously would be entitled automatically to surviving spouse's benefit. So there's no point really to put your spouse on such form, because a surviving spouse, as you know, would be entitled to surviving spouse's benefit. Right? So we always say, keep this in mind when you complete this form, that this is basically people who otherwise would not be entitled to a benefit from the fund, and who then at the time of death would receive these monies if we have that form in file. It needs to be an original form. If there is no form in file, the money is still yours, obviously, and in case of death, it would go to your estate. All right, so, do you want to talk a little bit about? Yeah.
The pension adjustment system was actually covered by us this morning for those of you who are thinking of retiring. So I'm not going to go through the slides, but it's out there. I believe this slide will be posted in your net, right? So you could read it at your leisure if you think that this is applicable to you. But basically what you just have to remember is that when you retire, your benefit will be established under the US dollar track. That's for all of us, right? So your periodic benefit, not your lump sum, will be adjusted by cost of living whenever there is a movement in the CPI of more than 2%. So basically, if you retire now and let's say you're getting $500 a month, that $500 will not remain $500 for life. That will increase whenever there is a movement in the cost of living of at least 2%. So basically, that's what's being protected in this pension adjustment system. Now, under this system, we also have what we call the two-track, meaning if you, let's say, reside, not in Vietnam, as I explained this morning, Vietnam, unfortunately, is one of the countries where two-track cannot be implemented as we speak. I'm not saying that that's going to be the same case in the future, but let's say you retire, you reside or you choose to reside somewhere outside of Vietnam, let's say in Thailand or in the UK or elsewhere, you have the option of declaring that country as your country of residence. What's going to happen is we will establish your benefit in that country of residence that you declared, compare it with your U.S. track pension, and you are entitled to receive the higher of the two track. Right? So in a nutshell, that's how the two track works. So again, if you really want a more detailed explanation on that, we'll be quite happy to meet with you after the session. But basically, that's the whole idea of the two track. So again, there will be slides that would just give you an explanation of how this pension adjustment system works and the two track. And you can read it when it's convenient, and it's out there. So let me just skip that. Again, we have a very good booklet in the website on the two track. This is actually one of the self-explanatory booklets that we have available. If you are interested, have a read, because that will give you a very good simplified explanation of how the two track works. I know that we have colleagues from China who is very much interested in this two track system, but I think we can talk about that after the session. Okay, I guess Christine will talk to you about the pension fund website.
All right, so the website. Yeah, we hope this is a useful tool to support the information you're getting today. And we are aware that you're getting a lot of information today, so likely you would probably want to read about certain subjects, if you want, on the website. And we have a number of booklets, like the track booklet, but also others that are relevant to you, that you could maybe go to and read through them, because they are written in layman terms and should probably give you a rather simple and straightforward explanation of different issues that you might be interested in. So there are booklets on participation, separation, survivors benefits, etc., etc. So all that is available on the website, as well as different tools. The website address is up there. It's pretty straightforward. If you enter the website, since you're a participant right now, you would enter as a participant and then be brought to this page, where at the top button you can see on the left-hand side under My Fund it says Login. I don't know how this works, but sorry. So you would log in. All you need to log in is your name and your pension fund number, and I think your duty station, and that's it. So you would provide an email address, and then you're registered, you submit, and within a couple of minutes you will get a password sent to the email address that you provided. With that password and your pension fund number, you can then access the website. And on the website you can access your annual statement and the benefit estimator. And these are two tools that are very frequently used by participants for very obvious reasons, because you can see on the annual statement what is your status with the fund, what is the information we currently have in file for your dependents, etc. So that is certainly something you should access every year, especially to check that the information that is given on the annual statement actually is correct and corresponds to the number of dependents, your marital status, the grade and step, etc. The benefit estimator, obviously a very helpful tool for you to see what is your entitlement in the future at a given separation date. You can enter yourself a separation date and therefore then get an estimate of how much you would get if you stayed in service until that separation date. Obviously, the closer you actually are to the date of separation, the more accurate is the estimate going to be. If you're 20 years from the actual separation date, we don't know your career evolution, we don't know what the PR rates are going to be, so the amount you would get is not necessarily very close to your actual future entitlement, but it does give you an idea. However, if you're closest to separation, you probably will get a very good idea of what your future entitlement would be. Just keep in mind that it is based on the information that the pension fund has in file at the time when you're running this best estimate, and that we have a year-end closure process once a year, at which time organizations report to us contributions, etc. So basically, if that year-end process has not been finalized yet, we will not necessarily have the most up-to-date information for the past year. So currently, for example, we are still in the process of closing our books for 2011. But keeping this in mind, the online estimator is pretty accurate and is actually fed with the same information that we have in file that we would run if we ran our estimate in-house in the pension fund. All right, so it's definitely a good tool. And then there's a number of other information that you may find interesting, but the annual letter, all official forms of the pension fund, among which also the designation of beneficiary form I mentioned just before, or the, for the future important, your payment instructions forms. Any form is available on the website, at least in English and French, and can be downloaded, obviously. Oh, here's just the site where you can see how you access. So if you're a new user, on the left-hand side, you would click on that side or registration. Otherwise, once you have your password, you can just go in on the right side, as you can see. Now here we have an example of a benefit estimate. And we put that up here because we often get questions on how to read an estimate. So I don't know whether I can point with that. But basically how you read this. Sorry. You can see that under 1 year, first of all, there's a disclaimer obviously saying this is an estimate, and since it is an estimate, it's accurate. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So since it is an estimate, what we're telling you is it's based on whatever we have in file. It's never going to be accurate until the date to actually separate. We have all information in file and we can audit that information. So, but then it tells you here, in this example, for example, someone ran an estimate at the separation date, normal retirement age. So the entitlement then that this person would be allowed to get is a retirement benefit under Article 28, which means a full retirement, right? Not reduced, not early retirement, but a full retirement. So this is the default estimate that would be issued, where you can see that under 1 year, we have the full pension, which would be 53,800 something per year. So you divide that by 12, and then you have your monthly benefit. And then underneath, prospective survivor, based on this benefit, so in case of death, a prospective survivor would get 50% of the above amount, which is 26,900. Or, as we say here, 2, reduced pension if you were to elect the lump sum. And here the default amount that we are giving is the 1/3 maximum lump sum you are entitled to. You do not have to take a maximum of 1/3. You can take any amount between the maximum and 0. So if you said, okay, here in this case, we give you as a default amount the maximum of 1/3, which would mean if you elected a lump sum, your maximum lump sum would be 383,000 something paid out as a lump sum, which then would reduce your monthly or your yearly benefit amount from 53,000 if you didn't take the lump sum to 20,600 something if you did take the maximum lump sum. Right? So, the more you take as a lump sum, the less you get as a yearly benefit amount for life. And then it says underneath prospective survivor, in case that person elected the maximum lump sum, you will see that the amount payable as a survivor's benefit is still 26,900 as it would be if you did. All right? So this is how you read this estimate. If you want, you can run the same thing, obviously, for an early retirement benefit, in which case you get the same sort of estimate with survivor's benefits, if applicable, and lump sum election, etc. So just so you have an idea. For the estimator, just be aware that you can run estimates by entering your own lump sum amount. So, as I said, as a default, we will always give you the 1/3 maximum, but you could enter in the estimate page, okay, I don't want 300,000, I want only 100,000. What then would I get as a yearly pension for life? So you can adjust that and play around and get sort of an idea of how much would I get if I took a lump sum of so much. And here we have the annual statement, so there's a lot of information. I'm not going to get into all these little boxes, but how to read this is basically looking on the first line at the information we have in file for you as, are you single, are you married? Then we will check, or you should check, is the date of birth we have in file for you correct? Are the number of children that are reported correct? Is the category that is reported correct, etc., etc. So you should definitely try and access this annual statement to see what the pension fund has in file for you as information. Because if you come to us many, many years later and say, well, the date of birth you have there is actually completely wrong, that's going to be a big problem, because the date of birth that's reported to us, if it is changed after several years, we will probably not accept a change in date of birth, because we say it is your responsibility as a staff member to ensure that the data that the organization is in file and we have in file is correct. Of course, if there is a solid explanation and reason why there is an error in the date of birth, we will look at it. But, for example, after date of separation, it is 99.9% certain that we will not accept a change in date of birth, because, as you have understood now, whether you are younger or older has a huge impact on what kind of benefit we are going to pay to you or what you are entitled to, whether a reduction factor applies, etc. Okay? So, all these things you should definitely check. Then you will see that you have here the number of contributed years of service that you can also check, etc., etc. Note please that the contributions that are given here correspond to your own contributions made over time. It does not include the contributions made by your organization. So in order to get the full 1/3 of your own contributions plus 2/3 from the organization, you would have to just multiply by 2, obviously, the contributions reported here under your own contributions, and then you have the full amount. Basically, you take this amount times 3. Get the 3/3 contributions made for your contributory service. Right? And then here at the bottom, you see you have the annual pensionable remuneration rates used for the purpose of the exit. All right. So a number of frequently asked questions that we often get and that we would just like to clarify right now. One is that there are these figures out there, 15, 25, 30 years. And what do they relate to? And there's information floating around that, for example, you have to have 15 years of contributory service to be entitled to a pension. Not the case. And I hope, and we hope that after this presentation, you are at least familiar and understand certain very basic concepts of pension participation. So here, let us just go into those figures because they are coming up all the time and explain that the magic figures are actually not magic at all, but that the number 15, number 15 relates to the withdrawal settlement amount you are entitled to. So if you did not, either you're not entitled to or you do not elect a pension benefit when you separate from service, but you take this withdrawal settlement, the payout of your own contributions plus interest, plus an additional 10% for every year over year 5 up to a maximum of 100%, meaning up to a maximum of year 5 to year 15, right? So if you took a withdrawal settlement and you have served 15 years, then in that case you would get an additional amount of 100% over your own withdrawal settlement contributions, withdrawal settlement amount. So what I'm saying is, this might be confusing. If you take a withdrawal settlement, you are serving between 5 and 15 years, or you have served between 5 and 15 years. For every year between 5 and 15, you get an additional 10%. So you can leave the organization or the pension fund with a withdrawal settlement amount of your own contributions plus up to 100%. So you can double the payout of your contributions. You will never get the part that the organization pays in because that doesn't belong to you. That is used to fund the system, to cover the risk of disability and death, etc. But with a withdrawal settlement, if you have 15 years of service, you can leave with double your own contributions. Withdrawal settlement, okay? And then the other two figures, 25 or 30, you may remember that the reduction factor that applies if you took an early retirement benefit. In that case, the reduction factor is depending on how many years of contributory service you had. Someone who has 25 years, who has less than 25 years, has a very high reduction factor of 6%, applied for every year that you retire earlier than normal retirement age. Someone who has between 25 and 30 years of contributory service has a reduction factor of 2 to 3%. And then someone who has 30 years of contributory service has a reduction factor of 1% for every year that you retire earlier than normal retirement age. So the years 25 and 30, these figures refer back to this reduction factor and indicate that the longer you serve, clearly, there are certain benchmarks that will drastically reduce the reduction factor, that will, penalize you more or less for taking early retirement. Okay? So this is what these figures relate to. Okay, so now what are the steps that you should definitely keep in mind at the time of separation? First of all, we always say, run your own estimates. You can also ask us if you have trouble running the estimate. Of course, we're there to run estimates for you, but start already with trying to get on the website and run your own estimates to get an first impression. Then you have to submit payment instructions. The payment instructions, we only accept original documents. So often we do get payment instructions sent to us by email as PDF attachment or as a fax. We cannot accept them. We need to have an original signature for your own security to be sure that this comes from someone where we can verify signature. It's not being falsified. So we need original payment instructions. On the payment instructions, and that depending on whether you're electing, depending on whether you have more or less than 5 years of service, you have different forms, but that is, let's say, that's on an aside. On the payment instructions, make sure that you provide full banking information. Provide a full mailing address and also an email address and a telephone number, personal, so that we can reach you in case there's an issue with the payment instructions, and we don't have to send a letter to Vietnam, but we can get in touch with you with an email or by phone and say, okay, we need new payment instructions because the ones we got are not completed correctly, for example. But even better, of course, would be if we are sure that you get information how to complete correctly the payment instructions, and among those is make sure you complete every page of the payment instructions. You sign every page, you put your name on every page, you date every page. Make a clear benefit election. Be sure that the benefit election you're making is actually something you're entitled to. Oftentimes we get payment instructions where someone elects a benefit they're not even entitled to. So all these things you can clarify beforehand, either with your HR offices or you can write to the pension fund to make sure that they are correct. So once they are sent to us or to your liaison office for pension purposes, they are correct and we don't need to get back to you, have to ask for a new form, you have to send it again. Okay? So this is something you can help making this separation process. Also, for someone who's entitled to retirement benefit, we need additional information. Basically, we need supporting documents like your birth certificate, your spouse's birth certificate, ID documents from you, birth certificate for any child under age 21, if there's an entitlement to a child's benefit, marriage documents, divorce documents. That's basically the major, these are the key documents we definitely need at the time of separation. We need only copies. You don't have to send us originals. We don't need to see originals. We want copies. Often we get asked, but why do you need to see these documents or my birth certificate? My organization saw it at the time I joined. Why again? Because we often have cases where there's a discrepancy between the birth dates that were given to us by the organization and then a birth certificate that is submitted to us. We have an obligation on our side for audit purposes to ensure that the date of birth that you provide is correct or that we have in file is correct. So these things are just a requirement that we have to fulfill and we have to get that information from you. Okay? So, on your side, this is what you can take care of when you separate in terms of what you need to submit to the pension fund. The employing organization will submit to us a document called the separation notification, where we are going to receive the latest PR rates for you for the current year, and of course, the separation personal action. Again, these documents have to be completed correctly by your organization, but they usually know how to complete these documents. We need to get the original separation notification, which has to be signed by the authorized finance officer. So once these 3 documents have been sent to the fund and received, and are original, the fund, upon receipt of the latest document, will start counting and normally has a processing time of 15 business days from the date of receipt of the latest of these 3 documents, so the latest date of receipt. So in many cases, when these documents have been completed correctly, we actually, I would say 90% of the cases, we complete the cases within the 15-day benchmark. However, there is, in many cases, a delay between your date of separation and getting these documents. So what we always underline is that it's a collaboration between you as participants or then beneficiaries in the future, your employing organization and us to ensure that this pension benefit can be processed as quick as possible. But we all have to play together because we depend on each other. And if we don't get these separation documents, we can't start calculation. If we don't have duly completed documents, we can't go by them, but we have to ask that whoever didn't complete them correctly rectifies and ensures that it's correct. Also, we start to review your case once we have our documents, but at that time we may see that there are discrepancies in the contributions that were reported, or we see that there's a discrepancy in the date of separation, or in the date of birth, whatever it may be. Many cases require that we go back to the employing organization and clarify That, of course, is going to delay this 15 business day benchmark or this time frame. And we have to find out what is the case and make sure that we have correct information and base our calculation of your benefit on correct information so that we pay the benefit that is due to. All right? So just be aware that 3 actors come together trying to make this process as smooth as possible. But it is your responsibility to make sure that the document that is requested from you, payment instructions and the supporting documents, are submitted in a due time, and also that they are completed correctly. And another thing is that many times the organization cannot release the separation notification until you have completed your separation process in the organization. So if there are issues with outstanding payments, or if your leave situation isn't clear, they will probably not release the separation notification. So what you can probably do is start as early as possible ahead of separation to clean up the records and make sure that whatever is needed on the organization side for you to be cleared in the separation process is done or in preparation. So that when you separate, actually there's nothing outstanding and they can continue with issuing the payroll documents. All right. So finally, if you want to get in touch with us, you can do so by phone. However, and I hope none of you had to go through the frustrating experience of calling the pension fund. And if you did, I'm sorry if you had trouble getting through, but we have a real problem in answering the many calls we get, because we don't have enough staff to duly answer all calls, handle all walk-in clients, plus answer the many email queries we get. So basically what I would urge you is that if you have a question, send us an email. Most likely it's going to be a much less frustrating experience than trying to phone us. And the email, it may take a few days before we get back to you. Give it some time, but we will get back to you. We have a system where we get a work type open for every email, and usually, I mean, there are sometimes certain cases that fall between the cracks, but most cases are getting a response within a rather good time frame, given the scale of operations we're dealing with and the number of staff we have to do so. So basically what I'm saying, if you want to contact us, do it by phone or email, probably preferably by email, or visit the website and try to see whether you get information that you need, maybe even on the website. All right, thank you very much. I think we're giving the floor.
Thank you very much. You don't need to wait until the end to write your questions down, but if you've got questions ready, raise your hand and they'll come and collect them. I'll start with the first question. It's a clarifying question, if we may. Just to understand that if you've contributed for longer than 5 years, 5 years or longer, but you stop contributing before your normal retirement age, we just want to understand the different options. So is it correct that there are 3 options? 1, you can have an early retirement benefit if you're older than 55 but less than the normal retirement age. 2, you could defer your retirement benefit until you reach the normal retirement age, so you don't have to make a decision. Or 3, you could withdraw a lump sum, and you have 3 years to make that decision on withdrawing the lump sum.
Thank you. Yeah. So. Right. So yes. So this is someone then who is who has contributed the 5 years or more. So who has vested his or her pension rights and therefore can elect a retirement benefit, or since this person is retiring earlier than normal retirement age, could also elect a withdrawal settlement. So just going through the 3 options. Yes, there is an option to get an early retirement benefit, provided this person has reached at least age 55. 2, could this person defer the retirement benefit until normal retirement age, in this case say 62. Yes, absolutely. Just keeping in mind that this deferred retirement benefit does not carry any lump sum option, unlike the early retirement, and has no child's benefit attached to it. And the reduction factor would apply if the person started to receive a benefit any time before reaching normal retirement age. But yes, there is this option of getting a deferred retirement benefit for someone who obviously retires earlier than normal retirement age. It is followed, the question is, in this case, they do not have to make any specific decision. Well, that's not quite correct. You still have to make a decision. If you want a deferred retirement benefit, you have to elect that. You have to complete the form by electing deferred retirement benefit. So you are making a specific election or decision. And then the third option that is asked here is, would that person also have the option of withdrawing a lump sum? And I'm wondering, does this mean a withdrawal settlement? I don't know who asked this question, but yes, I mean, anyone who hasn't reached normal retirement age is entitled to get a withdrawal settlement, to receive payout of his or her own contributions plus interest plus possibly an additional 10% for every year over 5. So this is followed then, in this case, they have to make a decision within a period of 3 years. That's not quite correct. If you want a lump sum, you make that decision at the time, I mean, after separation or whatever, and you will get that benefit paid out then, the withdrawal settlement. But you don't have, I mean, you can wait 3 years before making the decision, but basically once you have elected the withdrawal settlement, you're going to be paid and that's it. Going back to this 3-year time frame, please keep in mind that after separation, you have the option to not make a benefit election for up to 3 years from the date of separation. So you can separate and say, I don't know what to decide right now. I don't know whether I want a withdrawal settlement or a retirement benefit, so I don't want to make a decision right now. And who knows, maybe I'm going to join the service of a UNJSPF member organization within the next 3 years, so I would continue contributing. So what I'm saying is you have, from the date of separation, 3 years to make a benefit election. All right? So you just have to keep in mind that you have to make a benefit election within 3 years. If you don't come back into the system as a participant and you have separated and after 3 years we have not received a benefit election from you, in that case we will make a benefit election on your behalf. And if you have not yet reached normal retirement age, we are going to elect a retirement benefit for you, a deferred retirement benefit or early retirement benefit actually, but let's say a deferred retirement benefit. You're losing the option of getting a withdrawal settlement if you're not coming back to us within 3 years from the date of separation with the benefit election.
Okay. We have another question, just a quick one. If you have less than 5 years of contributed service and you want to withdraw, and your annual statement shows interest, but we understand if you have less than 5 years, it's just your own contribution and no interest. Could you clarify that for us, please?
Okay, a withdrawal settlement is a return of your own contributions plus interest. It's always with interest.
Your interest on your contribution?
On your contributions, right? So if you have less than 5 years of contributory service, you contribute $1,000. We give you back the $1,000 plus interest of 3.25% per annum.
Right.
Right? If you have, let's say, a 6 years of contributory service, you contributed, let's say, $1,000. You wanted to take a withdrawal settlement. What's going to happen is we take $1,000, we add 10%. Remember, if it's more than 5 years, we add 10% for every year after the 5th year. So we add 10% plus interest. Okay, so it's always with interest. So if I just may go back to what Christine is saying about the 15 years. So let's say you contributed $1,000. after 15 years of contributory service, you get double that. So we return $2,000 to you plus interest, because it's 10% for every year. So on the 6th year is 10%, on the 7th year is 20% more, 30% more, etc., up to a maximum of 100%. But let's say you have 20 years of contributory service. You contributed $1,000. You still get up to a maximum of double that, 2,000. But of course the interest, because it's 20 years of interest worth, then it's slightly higher. But it's always with interest.
And the withdrawal is only if you leave. You can't take a sum if you haven't left.
Oh, well, we can't pay you anything until you leave, until you separate from service. So that's a requirement. You have to say, we can't advance you a pension benefit, basically, be it a withdrawal or whatever form of benefit. You have to separate from service first.
Right, but if I have a question here. If I separate and then I come back again and then I leave again and come back again, how often can I, or what is the gap between? Because there are lots of these funny contracts that were there.
Okay, for as long as you leave, come back within 3 years, and we haven't paid you a benefit, right? So you leave your money, you haven't decided, then you come back again, and we haven't paid you anything. Basically, if you do this, leave and come back within 3 years, your participation is continuous. We will simply report a break in service, break in your contributory service, because the period that you're not working, you don't have a contract, of course, we cannot add that to your contributory service. So there will be breaks in service in the total CS, but it will all be continuous. So 3 years. So let's say you separate from service, there's a huge break of 5 years. Basically, if we haven't paid you anything, we will ask you at that time, you have this money sitting with us. What do you want us to do with it? Do you want to take that as a withdrawal settlement? But the thing is, you start fresh. It's a re-entry after 3 years. It's not continuous anymore. I don't know if that's clear. So if you come back, come back within 3 years, you keep the same pension number. Whereas if you separate and return to the fund after 3 years. So let's say on the 5th year, it will be a fresh participation for us. The assumption there is, first of all, we would have paid you already for the first one, but then you'll have a fresh new number.
Okay, I have, but just to clarify that you have to be on a staff contract qualify for the pension fund.
Yes. We don't take consultants, nor SSAs, nor I don't know what other special type of UNDP contracts you have. I think even UNVs are not in the fund. So yeah, you have to have a staff member status in order for you to be eligible to participate.
And sometimes we hear with medical insurance, you have an annual recruitment campaign, or you've mentioned some deadlines. It doesn't matter what date in the year you join the pension fund or what time you finish. There's no calendar year for your pension. We clarify
No, I mean, the thing is, we always go by what's in our regulations. The moment you qualify, if you have a contract of at least 6 months or longer, you join, you're given a contract of 6 months or longer, or you completed 6 months of continuous service without any break of more than 30 days, you're in the fund. It's mandatory. You can't say, I don't want in, or, I mean, it's mandatory. So for as long as the conditions are met, you're
right. And
in.
Can I be efficient and submit all my documentation? I have a question here. Before I think I'm leaving. Why do I have to wait until 1 month before, and then it's a big panic, and then I find out that the whole of WHO has decided to close their office at the same time, and I'm in a big competition with them?
I mean, we are not preventing you from doing that. Of course, if you submit a birth certificate now, we will take that in. But what you have to remember is that some of the documents are required only if you are getting a pension from us, right? So if you're only separating as a withdrawal settlement, you're not getting a full, any of the periodic benefits. We don't really need your birth certificate. But of course, if you want to submit it to us, we will take it in, of course. For the payment instructions, normally it should be valid within the year. So if you submit it to us now and you're retiring in 2 years, most likely we will go back to you and ask you for new payment instructions anyway, because we wouldn't know in the 2 years whether your own banking or whatever situation had changed and you may want a fresh banking instructions anyway. But yes, if you want to submit it well in advance, we will take the documents from you.
We have a good question here on if you have less than 5 years service, are you eligible for disability benefit if you are injured, say for example crossing the street?
Disability benefit, you're basically covered from day one. The only caveat or the condition there is that you should have undergone medical clearance. I mean, meaning you did not refuse to undergo medical clearance. For as long as you're medically cleared, you become a fund participant, you're covered from day one. You don't need the 5 years of vested period. But if you refuse medical clearance, then that's a different story. You're not entitled to disability benefit, nor are you covered for death in service. But basically, you're covered from day one.
Then we have a question related to that. If you sort of at 55 you defer your pension and or stay 2 or 3 years, are you entitled to sort of medical insurance or health insurance, or that is outside your purview? Not your...
That's a tricky one. That's completely handled by insurance. What we usually say is get in touch with insurance to inform them of the situation, but we can't give you a generic answer to that.
I mean, I believe if you, let's say, opted for a deferred retirement benefit, right, meaning we are not paying you just yet in order for you to keep the insurance, I believe you have to make your own arrangements with them on how you should pay the premium. Because obviously, if we are paying you a pension benefit, you have the option of asking the pension fund to pay the premiums directly to ASHI by deducting it from your periodic benefit. But of course, if we're not paying you anything yet, we could not make the payment on your behalf. So I think in that scenario, you will have to make your own arrangements directly with the UN insurance service.
How can you restore your contributory services from different UN agencies? Or it doesn't matter because it all goes to the same?
Okay, if someone works for different UNJSPF member organizations and has breaks in service in between of minor periods, like of a few days up to these 3 years, for as long as there's no payout. So let's say you work for different UN member organizations, all of them contribute to the pension fund. For as long as it's a continued participation in our books, you don't have to worry about transferring from one to another organization. Does that answer? I mean, right. Without going into...
Okay. We will, of course, make available the presentations to everybody. They will be on the our website. Is that correct? UN Intranet. So that shouldn't be a problem. We have a couple of questions on interest and the overall funding. For example, you have this $40 billion. That sounds quite a lot to normal people. But where is it invested and how do you invest it? And the return appears to be only around 3%. Who is managing the money?
To defer that to our investment services who are not here. I mean, investment is a very specific section of the UNJSPF that is handled by specialists in the field. We are not necessarily specialists in the field of investment banking. I don't know whether you want to go there anyway, but you will see at the beginning of the presentation there was a slide saying basically the general lines of how our investments are, or where they are invested. the assets, but I don't think we can answer this question on how exactly the fund is funded.
No, but if you want information on where we are invested, what countries, etc., dollars, euros, please go to our website. Our CEO issues this quarterly statement on investments, so you will get a more detailed information there. We're from operations. We're not from the investment branch of the fund, so I'd rather not comment on that. But again, it's in the website if you are interested in knowing our investments as well as the returns.
So a couple more sort of related questions. We understand if you work for less than 5 years, you get your contribution plus interest back. What happens to the UN's contribution of the 15.8%?
Forget about it. I mean, don't even think about the UN share because that goes in the big pot. It doesn't belong to you, it doesn't belong to me, it goes in the pot.
But it means that the UN is still paying its share.
Yes, they are paying.
They don't get that back.
You don't get that back because even though, I mean, strictly speaking, even the 10% that we add, if it's more than 5 years, it comes from that big pot. It doesn't really come from your the UN's contribution that was paid on your behalf. It just goes in one big pot and we dip into that and we pay out. So I would suggest that you just forget the UN's share of the contribution.
The UN share, though, is coming from the salary budget lines of each of its staff.
What you have to keep in mind, it's like any insurance scheme. You are covered for the risk of death and disability. So even if you are disabled after, or recognized disabled after 3 days as a participant in the fund, you potentially may be entitled to a benefit up to age, whatever, 80, as a disability benefit from age, say, 27. So just keep in mind that that fund pays for that, for death and disability at any time, and to fund whatever payments are paid out to future survivors, etc. So what you have to consider probably is that the money from the organization pays to fund the system, to make it a viable pension scheme that covers you for all these risks and for survivors' benefits, and your own retirement pension may be payable far beyond what your own contributions would cover, plus the organizational share. It's like an insurance scheme.
And similarly related, you say that there's a small deficit at the moment. We can hear a lot that there are a lot of colleagues retiring. At the moment we're reaching a peak of retirement. What's the long-term impact? You say don't worry today, but does it mean that in 5 years' time they already know we should be worrying?
Remember, the 0.38 deficit is based on an actuarial calculation, right? We did the projection of the current assets plus the projected assets as well as the current liabilities and the future liabilities, and that's how that 0.38 deficit was arrived at. So basically what we're saying is that all those factors have been taken into account when we arrive at that figure. So I would still maintain that yes, we're in good shape.
And lastly, if the interest, how is the interest accrued if you elect for deferred retirement? Within 36 months or after 36 months?
I think let's not confuse a deferment of choice, where you actually have 3 years to decide on what you want to elect, versus a deferred retirement benefit, right? Deferment of choice means you separate from service now. You think that you may join the UN service again, so you don't really want to commit, because remember, once you commit, you're almost set in stone. You can't really change your benefit election anymore once the pension fund has implemented it. So you have 3 years to decide that. You know, some people may think that they might join again, so they don't make the benefit election, so that's for 3 years. Now, a deferred retirement benefit is different. You separate now, you're, let's say, 40 years old, you want to leave the money in the fund and maybe start getting a pension from age 55, right? So you actually elect to elect a deferred retirement pension. Now, deferred retirement pension is set. Let's say it's set at $1,000. It remains that $1,000 a periodic benefit until you reach the age of 55. After you reach age 55, there's a cost of living that's applied to that $1,000. So that increases. So let's say you choose to a deferred retirement benefit, you start drawing a pension at age 62, that's no longer $1,000 because cost of living has been added to that amount, but it's only from 55 onwards.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, this goes back to the option of validating prior non-contributory service we mentioned earlier, and the time frames that apply for many of these provisions like validation, restoration, transfer, etc. There's a very strict time frame for validation and restoration, for example, which is 1 year from the date of becoming a participant in the fund. So here the answer is clearly no, because clearly more than 1 year has passed since 1st of November 1994.
Okay, I have one more question here which is specific to Vietnam, is that for national staff, the vast majority could not enter the pension fund until the 1st of July 1994, notwithstanding that many of them were working for up to 15 years earlier than that. I presume that there is no possibility to change that situation. We have a question from a colleague that knows somebody who worked for the World Food Programme when they were in Vietnam, and they did receive a pension for those years, but it's the same as this question. The status will be what it is at the moment.
I really don't see any possibility of counting the years prior to July 1994. 94. I mean, the only time when the pension fund actually allows retroactive enrollment would be if the organization pays for actuarial costs. I mean, if there's an administrative error and it's found that the person had actually in fact qualified to enter the fund earlier and it wasn't done so, it wasn't reported on a timely basis, we accept it, but at a high, very, very high cost. There will be actuarial costs added. It's not just a question of the organization paying in contributions. There will be an added cost. So I don't know, I'm not saying that that's not possible in this case, but if ever you have to do it for everybody, so I don't know at what cost would that mean for the employing organization. And there, you have to make a big case for us to consider that.
Okay. I don't see any more questions. If that's the case, we'd like to remind you, before we say thank you very much one more time, we'd like to remind you that tomorrow we do have sessions for international staff and for national staff on how they get paid today, not about worrying about your pension tomorrow. We were conscious of people's work, so we did not want to put it all in one day. But tomorrow morning there are a couple of very interesting sessions you should be aware of. The timings are for tomorrow morning it is 9 o'clock for both, for international and for national, 10:30. At the same time, there's one more. Yeah, there's also an HR clinic. The other thing is that they are running drop-in clinics. So if after today's presentation you are now more interested than you were before, and you would like to have a one-on-one session to find out about your specific circumstances, this is an opportunity to do so. So if you want to do that, please contact Lin Chi or Nam, and they will be happy to try and slot you into a one-on-one session. Okay? Otherwise, I thank you very much for listening through the afternoon. I hope you found it informative. Please do share with your colleagues that weren't here. Try and share the correct message. And if you share a message they find too good to be true, they can always write to the pension fund by email or to Yuri and find out for themselves if what they heard is good news or not. All right, so thank you very much again. Thank you to the organizers as well.